This isn't a subject that everyone gets real excited about, but unfortunately it's one that's crucial for each of us to be aware of. First off, let me tell you, I am not an expert in embezzlement. Unfortunately, I am a victim. And as a victim, I tried to learn as much as I can to keep it from happening to me. And so tonight I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts, my insights, and the things that I have learned as I go through and tried to learn how to keep from being embezzled again. A lot of people say it won't ever happen to me. One of the things that I distinctly remember back in 1995 when I was embezzled is that the investigative detective who actually handled the case told me that if someone is trying to embezzle you, it's very difficult to catch them. If two or more are involved, it's almost impossible. Now, I want you to know it is normal and rightfully so for us to trust everyone on our team. And you may not think that any of your team members in your office would ever embezzle from you or commit fraud, but I would contend to you that you're probably wrong, because the prevalency of dishonesty in dental offices is extremely high, and it is very likely that you will encounter it sometime in your career. You may not even know about it, but there is a high probability it is there. Let me give you a few statistics. 2018, a survey was done by the ADA. Almost half of dentists responded yes to the question, has an employee ever stolen from the practice? Also, it was determined that almost 18% of those had been embezzled 4 or more times. 60% of the people did recover some money through criminal or civil court, but unfortunately, almost 86% of them never received payment from the employee for that theft claim. In other words, some people got some back, but a lot didn't. And unfortunately, a lot did not prosecute the employees in the first place to where they could get the money back. Statistics show that approximately 60% of dentists will be embezzled or a victim of fraud sometime in your career. That tells me that almost 2 out of 3 of us will have some type of theft occurring in our practice sometime throughout our career. Now, the objectives that I'm going to try and cover tonight that we're going to go through is, first off, I want to raise your embezzlement and fraud awareness. Next, I want you to try and recognize some potential embezzler characteristics, because there are some very common characteristics that you'll be able to see. Next, I'd like for you to understand why embezzlement occurs, and also ways that you can minimize the risk of embezzlement. That's most important. We can understand a lot of these ways, but if we don't minimize the risk, you're still going to get embezzled. Then last, I want you to figure out, what do you do if you think you have been embezzled? Now, I want to tell you a little bit about my story so that you can actually understand what has happened here. I began my practice in 1985. But my embezzlement occurred in 1995, 10 years after I had been in practice. It was a woman who ran the front office. She had worked for me for a little over 6 years. Outwardly, she was the model team member. She was hardworking. She was friendly. She was great with patients. She was willing to help in any way that she could, anytime, anywhere. Patients absolutely loved her. I trusted her so much that I actually had her pick up my children from school if a situation came up where my wife and I couldn't be there to get them. She actually knew the alarm code to my house. That tells you how dumb I was and how I turned over too much trust. So let me give you a little background about me as well. My undergraduate degree is in finance, so I have a business background. I worked in a bank for several summers and Christmases, all through high school and through college, and then also for the first year summer after dental school. So I knew the business aspect of it. I knew things to look for, but unfortunately, with time and trust, I eventually turned over more and more of the financial duties to her. And unfortunately, I got lazy in reconciling the things that I knew that I should. Honestly, the only reason that I caught her was blind luck and the financial background that I had that allowed me to be able to understand what she was doing. It was a well-hidden plan that she had. I could outright prove that she had taken about $12,000, But there was another $50,000 to $60,000 that I couldn't put all of the pieces of it together. I did press charges against her. Ultimately, she pled guilty. She was given a slap on the wrist, 5 years deferred adjudication, and I was reimbursed about $2,500 out of the $60,000 to $70,000 that she took. Needless to say, I came out on the short end of the stick. Hopefully, after tonight, my story won't be your story. And that's one of the reasons that I decided I need to let some other people know about this. So what is embezzlement? Well, if you want to take a formal definition for it, it's the theft of money or property from a business by an individual who's been entrusted with the responsibility of that asset. Basically, they're taking what is yours after you had given them responsibility for it. Now, there are two different types of embezzlement. One's a reconciliation theft. This is also known as shorting the deposit. It's simple to do. It's very easily successful, and it's not hard for anyone to do. They just take money out and they don't put it in the deposit. If there's no oversight to verify that the money and the taken in and the deposits are accurate and equal each other, they get away with it. Now, there's a second type called concealment theft. It is actually tampering with individual accounts to keep the practice in balance. There's more sophisticated, it's a more sophisticated, but it is still easily successful if there isn't much oversight. There's also what's known as fraud, which is more like insurance or Medicaid fraud, where people are doing this for a personal gain. We're not specifically really going to be talking about fraud tonight, but if you are able to prevent embezzlement, you're also going to be a long ways towards preventing fraud. Now, how do people embezzle you? Well, first off, let me tell you, if people want to steal from you, they will. There are new and innovative ways that people come up with every day. As an aside, look at it. I was just hacked for ransomware just yesterday. Not embezzlement, but another way of theft. But within your office, there are numerous ways that a person can embezzle from you or commit fraud. I just listed some of these. What about making fake vendors? What about stealing petty cash? If they handle payroll, are they going to go through and give themselves extra hours, a raise, or a bonus? Do they go through and use business credit cards for personal expenses? If somebody writes checks on your behalf of the owner, can they do that? Do you get points for your credit cards? Are they taking those and utilizing the actual points for their own personal use? Purchasing different inventory, supplies that they're using for home, theft of drugs or medications. You see the list. It goes on and on and on. There are a lot of ways that people can steal from you, unfortunately. And if they want to, there usually is a way that they can find out. That's why you have to make it as difficult for them as possible. But yet the most common form of embezzlement in a dental office, like with mine, was the misappropriation of cash and checks by the business office team member who's responsible for the day-to-day accounting. That's usually what happens. But again, it's not the only way. So how can embezzlement happen? Well, first off, most dentists are never trained in business. When I was in dental school, I was the only one in my class that had a business degree. Everyone else had some type of science degree. We had a few engineers, different degrees like that, but I was the only one that had a background in business. Second is, and one of the major problems is that dental management software does not integrate with the accounting software. For instance, we have Dentrix in our office. We use Dentrix for everything dental. We just had to upload everything Dentrix again to get it all to where it works for the office. But my accounting software there I use is QuickBooks. Those two do not integrate with each other unless I actually physically integrate them to make it work. Another thing, and I'm not saying that this is bad, but dentists do have a tendency to overtrust. In our hearts, we all want to give the other person the benefit of the doubt. And trust is a very powerful emotion, and it can block your judgment and your ability to accept a reality. Unfortunately, it's true. Emotions can sometimes cloud our judgment. Another thing is a lot of dentists don't really monitor their numbers. We'll be looking at some things that I do now a little bit later on to try and minimize this, to be able to catch things that are occurring before they get to be big problems. But if you're not looking at your numbers, it's going to be one thing that I encourage you to do. And finally, we're busy doing dentistry. You all know in our practices, we all have busy practices. We come in, we have our morning meetings, and we go to work. And it is usually from the start of the day to the end of the day, a burr is turning, a relationship is being built, a hygiene patient is being checked, something that we are doing in there to where it is nonstop, and we're busy doing dentistry. Nobody's really taught us how to run a business because we know how to do dentistry really well. But unfortunately, we are businessmen as well as dentists. Now, there are three common elements to fraud and embezzlement. And these three elements will always be present when you do have embezzlement or fraud. The first one is a motive. Person has to have a motive to be able to want to do it. We'll look at some of those motives here in just a minute. Second thing is there has to be the opportunity to be able to do it. This is one of the things that is going to be important for us, is limiting those opportunities for employees to be able to steal from us. And once you have a motive, once you have the opportunity, rationalization is not far behind. Now, I'd like to say I could do something about the motive and make everyone have good motives to not steal. I'd like to say that I could have people not want to rationalize why they should steal, but I can't do either of those. The only thing that I have any control over is the opportunity for that person to be able to embezzle from the office. This is what we're going to focus on. But let's look at each one of these different common elements. First off, let me look at motive. I call them the 4 B's. What I mean by the 4 B's, typically if someone has a motive that they're going to steal from you, it falls under one of these 4 categories. Bills, bets, booze, and bling. Take your pick. That's about what they're going to be falling under, because usually one of those categories, the 4 B's, are going to be why they're stealing from your office. Let's look at it a little more in depth. Things like debt and personal finances that people have may be a reason they feel like their head is underwater and they need to get out from that. And so they decide, here's some easy cash to take. Next, sometimes people come up with health issues and related bills that can become overwhelming. Rather than asking for help, they oftentimes will steal from us. I know probably all of us, if we had a team member that we valued, if they came to us with something serious, we'd help them in any way we could. But unfortunately, they steal from us many times. Also, different addictions, gambling, drugs, alcohol, take your pick, whatever the addiction is, those can be a motive for stealing. Also, divorce. This is actually what happened to mine. As I was telling you, each one of these things that happened, and some of the characteristics that I will go over in a little bit, every one of them were present in the time that I got embezzled. The lady that, like I say, that embezzled from me, she was going through a divorce at the time. Sometimes it's just jealousy of the doctor's financial position. They see things that we're able to buy and have and think that they should as well. And also many people just want to maintain social status. They want to keep up with the Joneses, and they want to be able to have the things that everyone else has. So let's also look at opportunity. Here again is the only thing that we really have control over. And one of your roles as a small business owner is to limit the opportunity an employee has to be able to steal from you. It's as simple as that. Unfortunately, every good idea boils down to work, and that's what ultimately you'll have to do. But if there's an opportunity for somebody if they have the ability to execute different financial transactions without checks and balances, that's going to be one way they can get to you. Another is if one person is in complete control of an asset and does the accounting for that asset. Talking about deposits, if someone enters the procedures that have been done, if they enter the fees, if they collect the cash, if they balance it at the end of the day, if they go through and have control over all of these things and there's little oversight, they have the opportunity to do a lot. Another one's inventory. We'll look at that in a minute, of how someone can steal through inventory. Some of the things that you might want to look at if you do have some of these and consider changing them is if somebody has a signature authorization on your checking account. That gives them the opportunity to write checks just like you can write checks, and it makes an easy way for people to commit theft, especially if you are not reconciling and banking and balancing the checkbook, or a third party doing it for you. Another thing, if somebody has access to your office after normal business hours, many times People who are embezzling will come in after hours to be able to correct numbers, to change things. In my office on the alarm system, I know if somebody comes in after hours, who it is, what time they came in, what time they left, cameras on everything. So it's something you want to be aware of. If they do have access to the offices after normal business hours and you are not aware of when they're going to be there, that's another potential concern. Also, if an employee is making deposits, that's a red flag. I would have you consider doing them yourself or getting some trusted team member who does not actually make the deposits or put the deposits together, making them. I personally make them all myself now. Also, reconciling bank statements. Now, this is one thing that I have turned over, but I turned it over to an outside source. I still pay all of the bills because I want to keep up with everything. And I'm going to tell you, it takes time, but I feel a lot better at the end of the day. But I did get tired of doing the quarterly reports and reconciling the bank statements, so I have an outside party that actually takes care of that for me. And another thing is, if you're not reconciling your bank statements in a timely manner, bank statements come in, it's easy to put them on a shelf and never do anything with them. But if you're not validating that everything matches up along with your practice management software, you're going to be susceptible to being embezzled. And also, and one way that people can steal from you too, as I mentioned earlier, is through falsifying time records. If you have somebody who keeps track of the time that people are working in the office and they're writing the paychecks, they could very easily be adding hours to their paycheck that you would never know about. So let's look at rationalization, basically moral breakdown. As I said earlier, once there's a motive and once there's an opportunity, rationalization is not far behind. In fact, it's really close behind. People can say things like, I'm behind on my bills, I'll just do it this one time. Well, if they do it once, I can tell you it's easier to do it the second time than it was the first. Also, what about the statement, so much money comes in this office, the doctor will never miss this. He won't know. And honestly, you probably won't if you're not verifying or keeping up with it. What about, without me, this place would never survive. I deserve more than what I'm being paid. People who think that they are irreplaceable and that you couldn't do without them. There are a lot of poor employees. I have some that I don't want to do without, but anyone is replaceable. I'll just borrow the money and pay it back later. Unfortunately, that pay it back later never comes. And why should the doctor have such nice things and I don't? My family deserves nice thing too. Or my child really wants that new iPhone or whatever it is, and I really want them to fit in. There's a lot of different things, but unfortunately, greed is one of them. Some people just have a thrill of being able to steal and feeling like they can't get caught. And that happens very often. So if you have those three elements, you are ripe for getting embezzled. I'll be honest with you. 35 years ago when I started practice, it was a lot simpler time. There are so many ways that an employee can steal from you today. Back when I started in dentistry 35 years ago, pegboard systems is how we kept track of everything. And the entire deposit was physical. It was usually cash or checks. Eventually, we started getting a few credit cards that would be coming in. But it was a very simple time, and it was a lot easier to reconcile and balance and maintain the records. Unfortunately, today, there are a lot of avenues where theft is possible. Excuse me. It is a lot more involved today, and there are a lot of things that we have to put up the caution flag for and say, we need to be aware of this. As I mentioned, now there are multiple pathways for deposit. You can have ways people come in and pay with cash and personal checks. It still happens. It doesn't happen as much as it used to. When I was first in practice, that's how we got paid. Not as much these days. Next thing were credit cards. People pay by credit cards. But you can also have insurance checks that come in. But then you can also have electric fund transfer that come through, be it electric fund transfers for insurance companies or electronic fund transfers that actually come from patients' accounts. If you're going to be utilizing payment plans or something of this option, or they just select to do it that way. What about outside financing? Things like Care Credit or different types of programs where people will actually get outside financing to come in. The reconciliations are a lot more difficult and a lot more involved than what they used to be. And add to that, if you're involved with a PPO or an HMO type plan, and then you also have fee-for-service patients, you've got different fee schedules and write-offs that are on where different patients, depending on what program or plan they're in. So to try and reconcile all that's a lot more difficult task and a lot more for you to keep up with in today's world of dentistry. Now, let's start looking at some ways to minimize the risk of embezzlement, because this is what we're really all interested in. We know the statistics now. 2/3 of us almost will be embezzled or stolen from sometime in our career. But let's see if we can get those numbers down, and let's look at some ways to minimize the risk of embezzlement. First thing I'm going to tell you is hire the right people. Embezzlement typically flows from hiring. Now, most people that embezzle and that you catch are often first-time offenders. They're actually not people who normally would have stolen from you, but they get in the right place, the right time. They start to get more familiar with the process. You start to trust them, and then you turn over more and more responsibilities to them. They get comfortable, and then a situation occurs where they begin to rationalize it. So let's look at this hiring the right people. One thing that I would recommend that you do is beware of dishonesty. You know, if you remember the old saying, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Resumes are very often embellished or falsified in the job market and the dental job market. According to Checkster, an amazing 78% of people polled said they had stretched the truth on a resume. Doesn't mean every resume you get it from someone is someone who's dishonest, but it does mean that you need to be diligent about verifying the information that are on those actual resumes that you get. Background checks. Background checks can reveal a lot of information. You can ask your insurance carrier for recommendations on someone who would be qualified to get those and perform those checks. But it's a good thing. Look at discrepancies. If you see anything, if in the discrepancies from the background checks or anything you just don't like. A lot of times people will go to even Facebook these days and look at their Facebook pages and other type of social medias to see what they see on there to try and pick up an idea of who this person is. Also, one thing that is very often missed is call references and call previous employers. And then once you do that, ask if they know anyone else you could call that might be able to give a reference. Very often, if you are calling a former employer, I found in dental offices, typically if I have called in the past, very often they're more than willing to give me information about the employee. But some are hesitant, some offices are hesitant to give out information. Typically, I found if they don't give you any information, that's usually a red flag. If they're willing to give you a lot of good information, keep that person on the list to be one you may hire. But call these references, find out what they're about and how they were in these other offices. Next thing is look for employment gaps. Not only employment gaps that actually show up, but also when you call these references, ask for when they did the time that they worked there. If, for instance, if you see someone and they worked from 2010 to 2012, and then from 2012 to 2014, those were they had two different jobs. But when you call the first office and they worked from 2010 to 2011, and the second job said they worked from 2013 to 2014, I want to know where that gap was in that 2011-2012 period, because it could be another job they've had some difficulties in, and they don't want you to know any of the information about. Look for employment gaps and verify their time that they actually did work at different offices. Next thing is just test the applicant skills before hiring. Someone may tell me that they can do dentrix, but that may just mean that they can schedule a patient and know nothing else about it. So always test the applicant skills before hiring, verify they do it, and then last, verify that they have certifications or education that they say they do. Make sure that they present different certifications. Make sure that they give you the documentation showing they actually do have the education that they say they have. If you hire the right people, you have a better opportunity to not have to go through and fight with the embezzlements. Now, next ways you can minimize the risk of embezzlement is look for common warning signs. As I mentioned earlier, every one of these common warning signs the woman who embezzled me did. Let's look at some of those. First off, some of the common warning signs are they've often been with the practice for a long time. Mine, again, she'd been with there a little over 6 years, I mentioned. Now, they can embezzle you during any time frame, and it can be a short-term employee, but very often it is an employee who's been with the practice a long time. Next thing you want to look at is they are very protective of their space. This woman really protected her space. She did it under the guise that she wanted to make sure that everything was correct and she didn't want anybody else have to do her work, but she was very protective of that space. Wouldn't let anybody into her zone. They often too come in early and stay late. Wow, here's a model employee. They're great. They come in early in the morning, they stay late, they're happy to do anything they can to help. But if this is happening all the time, start to just put a little note in the back of your head. Why are they coming in early and why are they staying late? The next thing is if the employee does have a change in circumstances or habits. As I mentioned earlier, the woman who I did, she was going through a divorce. During this period where she was going through a divorce is where she took the vast majority of the money. It had actually started during the time when she and her husband had had some difficulties prior to the divorce. But once the divorce she was in the process of the divorce and it was finalized, that's when the majority of the funds were actually stolen. Now, women, I'm not picking on you, but 64% are women, but they don't have any criminal history. And gentlemen, let's look at it honestly. In the vast majority of dental offices, more women work in the dental office than men in the front offices and as team members. So this is the only reason that women typically have a higher percentage. But again, look at it. They had no criminal history. They also take little or no time off. She didn't want to take vacations. The one time that when I finally did catch her, it was in a day that she had to take off because of the divorce. And something came up that we caught again, it was blind luck that I did. Now, they always ask to take on more and more responsibility that would limit oversight. This happened in my office, again, for my own faults and being too trusting. I used to send all of my bank statements home. That way nobody could get a hold of the bank statements and I would have full control over that. Well, I was negligent, slack in going through and reconciling the statements every month. And so she came in and said, look, that's a lot of work for you. Why don't you give me those bank statements and I'll reconcile them for you. So out of my brilliant mind that I did, they'd be mailed to my house. I would bring them to her unopened, give them to her. She'd reconcile the bank statements and give me everything. Not a smart thing, and hindsight's 20/20. Again, I began to trust too much. Look for different things that if they have unusually close relationships with vendors or patients, they could be having patients' charges go in, then end up charging them on the credit card and then coming in and crediting back their credit card and crediting more to their credit card. And then there's a lot of different ways they can do it. So look to see if this person is buying a lot of things that they normally couldn't afford. The week that the employee who stole from me took the most money in that week's time, we had actually been at a state dental meeting. And all of my staff was there. And after all of this came out a little bit later on, the staff said it was amazing that week she was buying all of them gifts while they were at the meeting. Well, I was buying them gifts ultimately, but she was going in and buying them all gifts. And that's the week she took quite a bit that week. Now, let's go through and look at some more ways to minimize the risk of embezzlement. Hire the right people, watch for some common warning signs. But I'm going to tell you, you need to be keeping your own financial records or hiring a third party to review and maintain them. If you're not doing this, you are asking to be embezzled. This is a situation that can really get you in trouble. I'm going to say that you need to maintain your own financials. Let me show you what I would recommend that you consider doing. First off, limit access to the practice management financials. The more people that you have in it, assistants, hygienists, all these people, they don't need to have access to all of it. limit it to the people who actually can get into the practice management financials. You can do that with the authority that people have on each one of these dental practice management software programs. Limit to the people, that limits the number of cooks in the kitchen per se, and you have a lot less records that you have to verify. Also, limit access to the accounting software. I am the only one who has access in my office to the accounting software. No one else does, except for the outside bookkeeper who does reconcile my bank statements, who has nothing to do with the office other than that. No one else can get into my accounting software but me. That way I'm able to keep full track of it. Also, if you've given somebody a blank check or credit card access, beware. It may be for a good reason, but you have to be careful with that. I had a situation happen in my office that wasn't embezzlement. It was truly an accident, but one of my assistants, who actually does a lot of the ordering for us, she also helps out at the office in other ways and needed to order some cleaning supplies. And so I gave her the credit card to order those, and she ordered them through her Amazon account. Well, unfortunately, the next month when she went through and just ordered some of her own stuff, she forgot to change the credit card, and we had 3 or 4 items charged on my credit card. I reconciled the credit card monthly, so we caught it. She, it was not, I know it wasn't theft, but she reimbursed me for everything. But it was silly of me to give her the credit card to buy those supplies. Next thing, make sure, again, as I mentioned, all the bank reconciliations are done by you or an outside source. Also, credit card reconciliations. Had I not been doing the credit cards reconciliations, I never would have caught that for a long time, or someone wouldn't, because it came across as Amazon. And if you don't have a purchase order for every Amazon type of purchase that is made, you can very easily get reconciled and just think, oh, that was something for the office. Also, I really firmly believe that the deposits at the bank, the physical deposit, should be made by a different person than the one who's actually producing it. That way you don't have any potential of someone putting together a deposit and then making the deposit at the bank and verifying it. Also, some things that you can look for, it's a sudden decrease in your receivables. If you look for a lot of that going down, like all of a sudden you had this influx of cash, but all of a sudden you don't have an influx of cash in your account. Also, look at a soaring overhead. This can be a thing that I'll talk to you about in a little bit, that we need to be looking at our metrics very close. Also, cash flow concerns and late charges, things like this. Just look at these, pick them up as potential concerns that you have, and then go in to see for red flags. Now, other than keeping your financial records and doing that, I would also hear that you maintain and review your office metrics monthly. If you're not doing this, please start doing it. You can do it with a little work through the practice management software that you have, the dental practice management software. Here's what I would recommend doing every day. At the end of every day, here's what I like to have done in my office. I have each provider, each one of the hygienists. We have 2 hygienists. I have myself, and I just recently brought in an associate who he is not doing his yet because we're just getting those things worked out. But I have each one of those providers verify their daily report, make sure that all charges were put in correct, and that they have signed it off, that they say this is what was done. Also, too, the front office needs to cross-check payments in the practice report, make sure that what says was collected actually balances with the deposit, make sure that this is signed by 2 people, have 2 people verify that that's correct. Then an owner's packet is prepared. This is for me at the end of the day. I get this every single day in my practice. I get a practice report that comes in, what all of the production, what the collections were, the total amounts and everything from that. I also get each of the providers' signed reports. I then also get the day-in terminal tapes for all of the credit card transactions that have been completed on that day. I get the practice management software deposit slip, because that practice management software deposit slip should equal the bank deposit slip. I also get the bank deposit slip. And the last thing that I get is I get any daily adjustments that have actually been made and why they were made. what the reason that they were taken off of this account. So I actually get these reports every day given to me at the end of the day. Do I look at them every single day at the end of the day? No, but I do weekly. I'll look at all of them. And then at the end of the month, this is a time that's important for the owner to do. What you need to do is you need to print out your own monthly reports that you have. Collections, receivables, get the receivables report, get deleted transactions, get any modified transactions that have been done. Look at any adjustments in there. Get your production and collection report from your practice management system. Look at any collection agency reports, because if you do have to turn people over to collections, very often those accounts are written off when they're turned over to collection. And if a payment comes in and the account's already written off, now they can take the check and the funds and go ahead and use it for themselves, especially if they have the ability to sign checks for you. Now, check, verify, go over, look to make sure that all of those daily totals that you have from each one of those day sheets equal the monthly total. If they don't, something has gone awry, and you need to find out. I'm not saying it's theft, but you do need to verify, why is there a discrepancy, and let's figure it out. This month for me, we've got a really weird one going on, because with being hacked, with us having to wipe the computer, we lost a complete day of production collection. Fortunately, we had the back stuff, and we only lost one day, and we're able to piece it together, but you can't go back and add things to that day because that day's closed out and gone. So my month's going to be off some without me going through and figuring all the numbers a little bit different than what I normally do. Also, make sure that you reconcile bank statements to the daily deposits. Make sure that your bank statement says that this amount was deposited on this day and this amount is what was supposed to be deposited. Now, this is all of what I get at the end of the month. But I also go through and I keep track of my metrics in different ways. I'm going to give credit to a gentleman named Dennis Mulholland, who is an acquaintance of mine from the Pankey Institute, who has passed away several years ago. He had a company that he put together a spreadsheet that you could actually go through and keep track of production collections, and it would do it all in a spreadsheet for you. It's a really neat system, and it may actually still be in business. I don't recall the name of it. Now, I took his idea and I made my own spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is pretty big, pretty small right now. I'll blow up some of it here in a second, but this is one of my old spreadsheets that I did from several years ago, the blank master sheet. But I'll show you a little bit of what it does. But I go in and every month I make sure that these reconcile with the practice management system as well. What I do, this top part that I'm looking at, has my production. Future doctor, which I just recently got. I have 4 part-time hygienists. I want what each of their production is. The front office puts these numbers in every day, gives the total production for the office. They put in the total collection for the office. It gives me the collection percentage, or what percent of production are we collecting on a daily basis. It gives me the number of comprehensive exams in a month, number of new hygiene patients a month, number of new emergencies, how many missed units for hygiene, how many missed units for the doctor's time, and how many days that we worked in the month. All of those, it gives me a running total as I'm going through in the month. Now, the bottom part of it, top part up in here, which I did cut off a little bit, shows different production collection goals that come from that upper section, and keeps track of each person's total down and how they are in relation to their goals. It also then, from that upper section, it will take the production and on a running basis, take it and put the production and collection into each month. And then it will give me a running total for the year. I also I break my expenses into 7 different categories. There are categories, whichever you want to choose, but I break mine down into 7 different categories. And I want basically my overall overhead to be 62%. It's typically what I run around it. And I tell you, if you have set a goal, and if you typically get around this, if your numbers are off, you need to be seeing why they are off. I also have what my target percentages are that I have on each one of these down here for each one of the categories. This percentage below will tell me what the actual percentage is and what the difference between what I'd shoot to get and what the actual percentage is. So tells me my total expenses for the months over here, and it gives me a running total of what my total expenses are. And then right here is what my overall percentage would be. If, for instance, somebody is stealing from an inventory standpoint, that's under my materials. If my materials number starts to get out of line, I can catch it early if I am monitoring it every month to see what's going on. So keep track of your numbers to look to see where everything is going. Yes, I've got the business degree. I've got all this, so I keep all these numbers. If you're not doing it, get someone, hire someone to keep them for you. It is a lot of work. It will take me 10 to 15 minutes a day. It will take me 45 minutes once a week, and once a month, it'll take me another hour. And so I do put some extra time in to get these things done. But again, I feel a lot better about things at the end of the day. So hire the right people, watch for common warning signs, keep your own financial records, hire a third party, maintain your office metrics. Update your software regularly. This is a given. If you're not updating your software regularly, somebody gets familiar with the computer program and they don't want to do the updates. Update it. Next thing you can do is inventory control. Again, you may not think that people could steal from you from inventory, but one office I read about, they had over $950,000 stolen inventory. The employee that was in charge of ordering, she would order the items, she would take them home and she'd sell them on eBay. This went in for a long time. That's why you want to keep track of your numbers and look at them. Inventory control, and the thing is follow the dollar. I'm going to tell you right now, every dollar that comes into this office is my dollar. Now I have to pay a lot of it out, about 62% of it. But if you don't keep up with your metrics, keep up and monitor the numbers in the office, unfortunately that dollar will no longer be yours and it will be a thief's dollar. You want that dollar to be yours. And so you can pay out employees and team members and all your vendors, everybody you want. Follow the dollar. I just took this and put up things. These are crazy ways that a dollar can go through to finally get down to where the bank deposit is made. There's a lot that goes on there and a lot of ways that people can interrupt it to try and steal from you. Last thing I would recommend is doing spot audits. Select about 10 patients a month, every couple of months, whatever you want to do. Some with past due balances, and figure out why are they past due and follow up on those and see if those things are actually being taken care of. So, like I say, if you're not going to do this, outsource reconciliation. Some other red flags you want to look for is diminishing cash flow, but your patient flow is up. Look for deposits and payments that don't match up. Look for increasing accounts receivable or accounts payable. Transactions without documentation, write-offs, things of this nature. Patient complaints about payments. This is also part of how I ended up catching the lady who embezzled from me. Significant adjustments in journal entries, poor accounting records, they don't do it. Also too, what do you do if you think you may have been embezzled? First off, I would say don't let on that you suspect anything because people can start to try and hide things. Next, I would contact a forensic specialist if you don't have the financial background to do it. There are dental forensic specialists in dental embezzlement and fraud, and they can do a risk assessment for you. Next thing, collect evidence to convict. I strongly believe you should convict someone because if you don't, you're going to cause two things. One, they can go to work for someone else and do the same thing. And secondly, the other employees in the office know that he's not going to do anything if we end up stealing. You can contact an embezzlement attorney, your insurance agent, your accountant, talk with them. And like I say, prosecute the employee. So what to do now? These are things that I'd recommend you start doing tomorrow. First, perform a risk assessment. If you don't do it yourself, again, get a forensic company to do it. You can go online and look up dental forensic embezzlement companies. You can pull up several of them. Also, establish a system of internal controls. If you don't have the controls that I've talked about tonight, you need to set those up and get them to work. It will not be fun to get it set up. You're going to have some pushback, but if you have a lot of pushback, I'd start worrying about the employee. Second thing is separate all bookkeeping, accounting, and financial duties. Do not let the same person do all of those. You need to monitor and maintain controls in your office. You need to separate the duties for inventory. You need to cross-train your team members. So if somebody can go in and actually do the same thing that another person is doing, and sometimes it's not a bad idea to let them do that. And I'll put to you, create a budget and maintain it. I love the people I work with. I trust them immensely. But I can tell you, as Ronald Reagan used to say, trust but verify. And that's what we need to be doing in our office. We need to trust but verify. So I want to thank you for your time. And this is my email if you want to contact and send me any questions.